Tuesday, November 9th, and I am standing here on the Chesapeake Bay. I'm at First Landing State Park, and we're here where the Atlantic Ocean meets the Chesapeake Bay. And that's why we live in this area where we have salt water and fresh water that mix together. The Chesapeake Bay is called an estuary, and that just means where salt and fresh water mix. In fact, little trivia fact, the Chesapeake Bay is the largest estuary in the world. And you live right near it here in Virginia. But why I'm here is not to talk about geography. I'm here to talk about the Battle of Chesapeake, also called the Battle of the Virginia Capes, that happened September 5th, 1781, during the American Revolution. It was actually, surprisingly, a French naval victory over the British fleet that took place right in this area outside the Chesapeake Bay. The outcome of the battle was very important when it comes to the Battle of Yorktown, which will happen just a few months from now. And so, Lord General Cornwallis was the commander of the Southern British Army in America and had won a bunch of very impressive victories for the British down in the Carolinas. Back then, North Carolina and South Carolina were all just one thing. And so he had been moving north up through the Carolinas.
Come on, Marley!
We'll just pause for a second so we have, just hang on, we'll go on.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
You're all good, I realize it's no good. He's cute. Okay, sorry, we had a little dog friend visit there for a second. Nothing wrong with that. So he has all of these victories in the Carolinas, finally with the last battle being the Battle of Camden, where he crushed General Horatio Gates' British forces. And so the Americans promptly brought in Major Nathaniel Greene to replace General Gates. And Nathaniel Greene will be the one who engages Cornwallis in a series of bloody battles that will greatly deplete the British strength. And part of Greene's army inflicted a stunning defeat on a larger British force at the Battle of Cowpens in January of 1781. That led to Cornwallis compelling him to abandon his Carolina campaign and move into Virginia, where naval support from the British fleet could be used better to his advantage. Meanwhile, on the James River, now working for the British, trader Benedict Arnold has been terrorizing the Virginia countryside. And so General George Washington asked that the French Navy, which we'll talk a little bit more about that, who had been located up in Rhode Island, in Newport, Rhode Island, he said, we want you to come south down to the Chesapeake, where we can use you for better advantage. So why was the French fleet on the side of the colonists, first of all? As early as 1767, France began watching this conflict between Great Britain and its North American colonies with great interest, even sending agents to America to figure out how serious were the colonists in their resistance to the British attempts to tax them without their consent and to make decisions for them without representation in Parliament. So the French foreign minister adopted a policy of just watching waitfully, just to see what would happen. And they sent a secret agent to Philadelphia to the Continental Congress and told the Continental Congress that there were two conditions whereby France would openly help the Americans. First, number one, they had to come out and declare their independence from the British, which we know they'll do in July of 1776. Second, they have to show that they can actually defend themselves against the British army. So the French said until those conditions are met, the French would remain neutral, even though in 1776 they started secretly sending military supplies and financial aid to America. And a French aristocrat who you may have heard of, one of my favorite characters of the American Revolution, the Marquis de Lafayette, he was very invested in what was happening in America. He was good friends with George Washington and Thomas Jefferson and James Madison, and he was just too impatient to wait for their country, for the Americans to enter the war. So in 1777, I think I said that all backwards, but you get it. He's too impatient to wait for the French to join. In 1777, Lafayette and some others with him come back. They've gone to France to see who will come. Lafayette comes back with volunteers, French volunteers, to work with George Washington's Continental Army. And so the Americans have a shocking victory over the British in Saratoga, New York at the Battle of Ticonderoga. And in July, they have already declared independence, so now the two conditions are met. And the French minister, the French minister, not the British minister, he begins to negotiate a treaty with the Americans. A treaty of alliance, where we're going to be partners in this war, and a treaty of trade. All right, so they become partners. It's called the Treaty of Alliances, signed in 1778, and that changes. This French declaration of war changes everything in the war against Great Britain. Everything is going to be different now. First of all, the British are now involved in an international war, not just a rebellion of their colonies. And the king's ministers now have to start spreading out their military resources and their navy over a much wider field of operations than they had to before. When the French fleet arrived in the West Indies on their way to America from France, the French admiral had orders to start coordinating with General Washington. So they used small, fast frigate ships, I say that 3 times fast frigate ships, exchanging messages between the admiral and the general. And so they concoct this plan for where their fleets will come together and their armies will move against the British in the lower southern part of the Chesapeake Bay. So a French force of 6,000 men join Washington up in New York City and march for the Chesapeake. Concurrently, the French are sailing towards what will be the United States, with a full force of 28 ships and 3,300 troops. General Cornwallis is on his way out of the Carolinas, moving north, traveling to Virginia to entrench himself in a strong position that would control anywhere you could anchor a fleet. He was going to control the anchorage. So Cornwallis comes to Yorktown, Virginia with 7,000 troops and waits for the British fleet to arrive with reinforcements and resupply by sea. The Washington and the French would combine their forces and rapidly march to Virginia to trap Cornwallis and his army. So after all these years of the Revolutionary War, the war has come to Virginia at last. And so the British fleet is sailing now from the Carolinas on their way north to resupply Cornwallis, who's settled down in the Yorktown area. When they arrive here in this spot, they are shocked and surprised to encounter the French fleet. They had no expectation that the French were even on their way here. The French had kept it a secret from the British. Now you have to understand, besides the French fighting for the colonists, the British and the French have a centuries-long animosity towards each other. They have fought each other in Europe. They have fought each other in the French and Indian War. The British and the French did not get along with each other at all. And so for the British to encounter the French fleet was very shocking for them. They were not anticipating that at all. And so out here off the Virginia Capes, the French and British fleet engaged in battle for several days. Now, neither one of them had a victory. The outcome was indecisive, but the British commander, Admiral Graves, felt that his fleet, his ships, were damaged enough that he needed to return to New York for repairs. He didn't stay here to help out Cornwallis like Cornwallis had expected. And now Cornwallis gets himself trapped. Without the naval support, he couldn't escape, he couldn't be resupplied, and he wasn't going to get any reinforcements. Outnumbered 2-1, by October 9th, he is surrounded by the French and joined by the American armies. They're under intense bombardment with heavy siege cannon. After 10 days, of that, and they're starting to run out of food, he had to surrender. We're going to talk a little more about that when we get to Yorktown itself, but I wanted to tell you about this battle of the Chesapeake Capes that took right here in Southampton Roads. And so when you come out to First Landing again, or if you've never been here, if you come out for the first time and you look at this water, you can say, wow, at one time back in the 18th century there was a French fleet and a British fleet in battle with each other as the French came in on the side of the colonists, in large part to the contribution of the Marquis de Lafayette. So that's it for today, and I'll see you on Thursday. Bye for now.